begin the meeting. So we're remembering Stéphane Charbonnier, the editor, Jean Cabou, the cartoonist, Georges Wolinski, the cartoonist, Bernard Verlac, cartoonist, Philippe Honoré, cartoonist, Bernard Marie, economist, Elsa Kaya, psychoanalyst and columnist, Mustafa Ora, copy editor, Micha Renaud, who was a visitor, Frédéric Boiseau, the caretaker, Brigadier Frank Brinsolaro, the police bodyguard, and Ahmed Merabet, who was the policeman outside. If you have a pen and you want to raise it, please do so. And then we'll just think about those 12 people for a minute. Thank you. And I'm now going to hand over to Giles Fraser, our columnist, who is going to chair the evening, and he will explain to you the format that he's going to embark on. Thank you, Giles.
Thank you, Alan. My job is simply to try and maintain a modicum of fair play and to make sure as many people as possible get to have their say. We're going to have a conversation up here for a little while, and then we're going to try and bring people in from the floor as soon as possible. At the moment, the lights are such that I'm finding it quite difficult to see people, so I wonder if we could get it so I could see more of the people, so that's much more helpful for us up here. Also, if you're watching this through the live stream, I have a computer in front of me and I can see questions that you might ask, and I can also put them to the panel, and you can join in the conversation if you're watching with the hashtag Guardian Live, or my Twitter feed, which I'm on, which is @Giles_Fraser. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask all of those who've gathered here to introduce themselves. At the moment, we're still waiting for Steve Bell, who I think is on his way. But everybody's going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to start with a bit of content, and we'll take it from there. Sonny.
Hi, I'm Sonny Hundal. I'm a journalist, writer, and I lecture at Kingston University on digital journalism.
Hi, I'm Henry Porter. For many years, I campaigned and wrote about civil liberties for The Observer, a little less now, so. I've also written several novels, and I'm currently involved in a startup.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Natalie Nougayrede. I joined The Guardian in October. I'm from France. I write a column and I write leaders, and I'm a foreign affairs commentator at The Guardian. I was previously at Le Monde. I was the editor, and before that I worked as a foreign correspondent and a diplomatic correspondent.
Hi, I'm Nick Cohen. I'm a columnist at The Observer. I write books. My last book was on modern censorship, how it works, and a large part of that, a substantial part, I tell you, was devoted to the fear religious violence spreads and the censorship and self-censorship that follows on from it.
Excuse me. Hello, I'm Shahidha Bari. I'm a lecturer at Queen Mary University of London. I'm an academic and writer and radio broadcaster too. I guess I'm somebody who would publicly identify as a Muslim too.
Hello, I'm Martin Rowson. I'm a cartoonist with The Guardian and various other places. I believe it's my role to give offence as a great gift, and I'm afraid I left my pens on my drawing board, which is why I didn't join in with the pen holding. I'm also a trustee of the British Humanist Association.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we want to hear from a French perspective to start with. Tell us how things are in France at the moment.
Well, France is obviously in shock and in mourning. Today was a national day of mourning. I've been in London over the last couple of days, but I have, as many French people, have been inundated with messages and a lot of emotion coming in. I think that you cannot minimize the importance of these events and this attack for French people. It happened in the center of the capital. Nobody would ever have expected such an outrageous attack. French journalists have come under attack, but generally in war zones, or there were kidnappings. There's a history of French journalists being put at risk and taking great risk, but never have we ever experienced an attack right on French soil, and so there's a big shock. There's a sense that freedom of speech, a pillar of democracy, pillar of the French Republic, has been directly targeted. And that this needs to be starkly defended. So there's strong mobilization, and on Sunday you will see a big demonstration in Paris, and I know many people who are planning to go, and there have been also, and there will continue to be demonstrations in other French cities. There's also fear in France. There's also fear in France because, of course, the guys who carried out this attack have not been caught, and the police, the manhunt is underway. Friends have been asking me, can I? What do you think? Can I go to public places? Can I take the underground? Can I take a train? There is fear to a certain degree in France, and on the political level. There have been many calls for national unity. The president has called the attack barbaric, and has said that the best way to defend a democracy was to be united. All mainstream political parties have joined in for calling for mobilization and standing for the right for journalists, however provocative they may be in their comments, in their drawings, to continue their work, and that gunmen cannot reduce them to silence. So that's a very strong feeling right now. The other backdrop is that yes, extremist views are being expressed right now in France, and I think that the far-right movement of Marine Le Pen, I fear very much that it will be benefiting from this level of fear, of indignation, and there will be a risk of seeing the Muslim minority in France, a country that harbors the biggest Muslim minority in Europe, seeing this community be stigmatized and targeted, and very, very tragically in the aftermath of this shooting, mosques have been targeted in different French localities. So it will be very important for people in France to be as determined, but also as cool-headed as possible in reacting to these events, and to not let fanatics from the far right or from radical Islamic Salafi movements that do exist in France, and to sort of overtake and try to make use of these events for some kind of benefit. So these are worrying times, I think, for France, even if there is strong mobilization. And I think this gesture of pens is a beautiful gesture, just as the I Am Charlie slogan. These were the only weapons that the journalists of Charlie Hebdo ever used, and they were gunned down. And this gesture, I think, says a lot. And it's worrying because this whole tragedy, because this is also happening in a Europe where we do see a lot of intolerance growing, a lot of xenophobia, France is not a unique case. It's become, in a way, the center now of this discussion about how do we live among different cultures, among different groups, different ethnic groups, different backgrounds. How do we integrate immigrants? This debate will continue, and it will be on a European level very important to stay mobilized for freedom of speech, for free independent journalism, and for a sense of common belonging inside democratic institutions.
Martin, are you sharpening your pen?
You don't sharpen pens, Giles.
Oh, do you not?
Well, I suppose you might if you're using a quill, but we've got slightly beyond that. I'm still feeling slightly numb about this. I've found myself sucked into a kind of media maelstrom for the last 24 hours where the entire world's media seem to be incapable of filling dead air without me. I don't know why. And I don't feel any better from having expressed the same opinion over and over again, which is that this is horrific, but if you think about the context, it's unsurprising. Because what Steve and I do, and what our murdered colleagues and comrades in Paris did, is, I believe, a fundamentally human thing. It's the way we mock, it's the way we make life bearable by laughing at all the things around us, including people who want to make everybody the same as them, including leaders, just like we laugh at sex and death and shit and all the other things that make our lives unbearable unless we laughed at them. But it is inevitable that the mocked don't like it. And this isn't just about Islam, actually. It's about something else. It's Ali Fazat, the great Syrian cartoonist, had his fingers broken 4 years ago by Bashir's thugs, the deadliest enemy of the Islamists, who presumably murdered our colleagues in Paris. The Nazis' death list featured about 30 cartoonists. People like Heath Robinson were on the Gestapo death list. Because despots cannot bear mockery. Because whether you believe in hidden imams or virgin births or your inalienable right to rule over people, or any of these preposterous ideas that the people who place themselves above us seek us to agree with or tolerate or go along with or worship, I mean, it's a ludicrous thing. And they are constantly defying us not to burst out laughing at their preposterous presumption.
You get death threats and that sense of...
No, not very frequently. Mercifully, no. I only really had one death threat. It was a very long time ago. I mean, I say that was pre-internet, post-internet, and below-the-line responses and emails, and especially from far away, you get death threats, but they're clearly by idiots, and they're clearly a long way away, so it doesn't matter. The only actual death threat I had was from somebody purporting to be from the UVF, who left a message on my answer machine. This was many years ago, this was about 1991, with a strong Lancastrian accent, saying, "We're going to kill you." Which, yeah, I had to laugh. I didn't laugh. It wasn't funny because it said a couple of other things which actually rather chilled me, so I did actually call the police, and they looked into it. And actually the police were rather more chilling than the phone message, because they came round, a pair of wide boys, and they sort of said, "Oh, nothing to worry about. Yeah, they don't usually do anything about it." Mind you, I'd look under your car in the morning, and that was his parting shot, which wasn't very reassuring. But mercifully, it never happened again. I should touch wood when I say this. So
that's a very chilled response.
Well,
it's a very chilled response.
Of course, but it's not something you... I think our American colleagues get death threats as a matter of course, and always have, because that seems to be the tenor of American sort of public debate. Partly because American papers are not like papers here, where you get papers that appeal to a specific readership, if you like. The Guardian is considered liberal. Most of the other papers are right-wing. In the States, the papers are area-based, so they appeal to the entire gamut of people. So you tend to get read by right-wing psychos through to left-wing zealots. there's something about the tenor of this. I'm talking about the past now. I don't know if it's still the case.
But Steve,
Yeah.
it's the. I mean, you've had it as much as I have, because I got some that were meant for you. You miserable limey asshole, why do you draw our president as a chimpanzee? It's not me, it's the other guy. You miserable limey asshole. But certainly when the Guardian first went online and our cartoons started appearing online, I would regularly get literally thousands of emails. If I did a cartoon about Bush's America, if I did a cartoon about Israel, there was one cartoon I did where I got 8,000 emails, mostly thanks to Melanie Phillips publishing my email address on her website, almost all of which said, "Fuck off, you anti-Semitic cunt." And it's not a death threat, it's not pleasant.
Oh, yeah.
It's not, I mean, and it's targeted
I meant a
hatred
specific
of
death
people.
threat
Of
where they
people
actually say they're going to kill you.
And interspersed with those, there were the occasional things, when I catch up with you, I'm going to kill you after I've killed your children, which is not nice. But I always find it sort of curious why people respond to cartoons. I mean, they don't, well, apart from always writing your so-called cartoon, I don't think Polly Toynbee gets your so-called subadverbial clause in paragraph 3. But we're always sort of saying, it's not a cartoon, you can't draw, you can't do what you're claiming to do because that diffuses the bad magic we're engaged in. But people's responses do seem to be incredibly violent in their language. Far more violent than I suspect our print colleagues get, but Nick may disagree with me, I don't know.
There's all difference. I mean, what the net allows is instant reaction, and newspapers, Twitter, everyone panders to that because it wants the traffic. There's a difference between people pouring out bile at you and even threatening to kill you, which I've had, which you don't believe. The key thing about, to go back to where we were with Paris, is this, is that if you mock Bush or Obama and some idiots in America threaten you, you probably don't believe them. If you mock the founding myths and sacred texts of Islam, you might well believe the threats that came from you. Interesting as well, it's something we haven't thought about much in Britain, but I do think it's something that's coming up. It's the same with, you might see the same with the Hindu extreme right as well. That is bubbling away. And that's what makes the censorship. It's not that there aren't, as you say, extremists, lunatics, people you would, if they were a neighbourhood, you would move to get away from them, everywhere. It is where the censorship comes in, is in, do we think these threats are credible? Are we genuinely frightened? And it's amazing watching how Britain's changed in 20 years. A little fear goes a very, very long way. It doesn't take much. It takes, one attack on a novelist and his translators, and boom, everything changes. And I fear, I mean, I'll see what Natalie thinks, I do wonder what kind of culture we're going to have after this. This isn't just one attack, this is a mass murder. It's not hyperbolic to say that. I fear, are we going to have a frightened culture with lots of no-go areas, which concedes huge amounts of ground to enormously reactionary, misogynist, homophobic, racist forces? Or are we going to fight back? And that to me, and build something better out of it. And that to me is a question that's still very much up in the air.
Sonny, I know you think things aren't necessarily getting worse, and it's actually that for a while things have been getting better, actually.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, so I want to partly counter what Nick said about, that somehow things are getting worse, because I actually think that things are getting better in many ways. But there's another point that I want to make, which is that I don't think it's just about free speech. So, I mean, I do believe that we start off with the base that we believe in free speech. We think that it's the standard that we should all subscribe to, and that we should be for and allowing people to be blasphemous. But was the attack on Charlie Hebdo just about free speech? Now, I just want to take off my journalist hat for a second and put on my counter-terrorism hat. And you think to yourself, extremist Muslims get angry about insults directed towards their prophet. But what they get angry more about is, I think, insults, the fact that there's a lot of Western Muslims who are integrating into Western society, and they don't want to see that because that annoys them and it goes against what they want. So they want, in fact, they need a clash of civilizations to not only bolster their arguments, but also to create what they want to create, which is a Sharia state. So I think, in one sense, an attack on a magazine like this is an easy win for them. Why do I say that? Because you think that now everyone's printing these cartoons out, and if you look at it, do you think that Al-Qaeda lot or ISIS are they going to be angry that everyone is now printing these cartoons? I suspect they're not. They're happy. And why would they be happy? They'd be happy because actually French Muslims are now going around these streets, and everywhere they see cartoons of the Prophet, ridiculed in the way that Charlie Hebdo did. I fully respect their right for doing that. But for Al-Qaeda, it's great, because what it means is more of those people will now think that this is not really a country for them, this is not really a country that respects them, and I suspect more of them will go towards Al-Qaeda, more of them will become more extremist. So then...
Can I just bring Henry in at this point? Because I just wanted to know, Henry, do you share this sense from Sonny that there's some sense of restraint is
I think
rather
it's
important?
really important for us. I'm an atheist, so I don't have any religious belief, but I think it's really important that we understand the difference between blasphemy and satire. And I think there is a line to be drawn there, not offending people just for the sake of it. I think if you're making a good point and there is some inconsistency or hypocrisy or some political power you're trying to get at, I think that's permissible. But I think we should be free about everything, but I think we should, in a sense, regard ourselves as being responsible when it comes to people's beliefs. Can I just say one thing which I think we haven't touched upon yet? A couple of things, actually. The first is that there were over 60 journalists killed last year in 2014, plus I think 19 people who are assistants to journalists on foreign jobs, and another 11 people working for the web, citizen journalists and stuff. That's a lot of people. And what yesterday said to me, quite apart from the issues of Islam and the issues of terror, is that actually it underlines the fact that journalism, far from what Sonny's saying, is becoming much, much harder all the way across the world. Even in democratic countries, in this country, we have the police following, bugging, taking pictures of ordinary journalists in their ordinary, everyday jobs. So investigative journalists, there are 6 journalists taking the Met and the Home Office to court at this very moment. In America, the Democratic administration has really performed an unparalleled attack on journalism. AP was bugged. Journalists covering Ferguson, the riots from Ferguson, or the protests, which would be like, were assaulted and threatened and told to move on, quite against the American Constitution. So I'd underline that point. The second point I quickly want to make is that what you don't want emerging from this is another series of really, really intrusive laws trying to track people or watch people, because that's the one thing that absolutely cripples journalism. And you'll see Dan Hodges in today's Daily Telegraph saying that what we need now is to give MI5, MI6, and all the authorities all the access they need to our email and internet. We do not need that. And that's the one thing that will really cripple our attempts to preserve accountability in this democracy.
Shahidha, can I just, a lot of some of the hard things that are being said is that Jewish community wouldn't react like this, or the Christian communities wouldn't like this, but there's a particular sort of thing about Islam that makes it react like that. It's a hard thing to say, but people are saying it.
Yeah, no, they are. I want to say, first of all, that I'm racked with anxiety, and have been the last 24 hours, about how we start to talk about this. We, all of us, Muslims in particular. And I'm racked with anxiety because I'm a philosopher, and I know that in moments of crisis, that there is a premium on a kind of moral clarity to be able to say that we are on the side of satire, and we're on the side of freedom of speech. But I also know that that is an impossibility, that those clarities are really, really difficult. And so I am racked with the anxiety of knowing that these questions are much more complicated than we may want or are desirable. I know that one of the anxieties for me has been how far we... yesterday I tweeted the Je suis Charlie picture as my Twitter profile, and then I changed it back, and then I changed it back again. And I've been thinking a lot about what it means to demonstrate solidarity. I mean, is it an expression of sympathy? Because, I absolutely sympathise. It's devastating to hear Alan recite that list of names, right? And in fact, it makes our picking over the analysis of ideas like freedom of speech and democracy really alienating in a way, right? It feels almost improper to do that when people lost their lives last night. But another part of me also thinks that solidarity also means identification. And for me, it's not okay to identify with Charlie Hebdo. I feel devastated for what happened, and I defend to the death, like everybody else, freedom of speech. But for me, there is also a difference or a distinction between ridiculing and lampooning religion and peddling offensive images. I'm not saying all of those images were offensive, but the history of Charlie Hebdo is a really checkered one. It isn't the equivalent of Private Eye, and we need to talk about that.
I mean, some of the images that I saw on from Charlie Hebdo, they disturb me as well. Not just I think the ones that particularly were so obviously disturbing for me were the sort of ones that seemed similar to sort of anti-Semitic tropes, and I don't think we'd have put them in our newspaper.
Well, I'd just say if you look at the Arab press across the Middle East, you will find appalling anti-Semitism as a matter of fact every day.
That's not okay either, right?
It's not okay either. But I do think a lot of people who want to be offended, I think this is a very important thing to say. If you don't like a program on TV, if you don't like a cartoon in a magazine, don't look at it. You have the freedom not to be offended. I mean, I think there is a desire to be offended, which offends me. I think if you're free in this society, you can turn off the TV, you can not buy it, you can not look at the poster.
There are plenty of people who are offended if you don't offend them.
That's
Most of Twitter, in my experience.
I mean, the thing about offence is that for the last 15 years, at least, people have been taking offence as an offensive weapon, and it's a very, very clever trope because it means that you.
But there are things.
Well, let me just finish. This is quite important because if anybody says what you have said is offensive, it means that you've actually transgressed the rules of intercourse, as it were. So it means they've won the argument. You've got to shut up. I mean, The Guardian published a letter after I did a cartoon of Radovan Karadzic being dragged off to The Hague, and the figure of Justice looking over her shoulder at the sole of her shoe, as she trod in some dog shit, spelt out the word Iraq, which I thought made a reasonable point. And The Guardian, bless it, published a letter with somebody saying, Martin Rowson's cartoon was offensive, yours sincerely. Almost as if they justified themselves by saying, I am offended, that's fine, now you've got to be quiet.
I'm sorry to ask such a direct and crass question, but you would think there are limits to the sorts of things that you would do. I mean, there are limits to the sorts of offence that you would
There are.
So how do you negotiate those?
Well, I have, I don't know, Steve can answer for himself, but as far as I'm concerned, I have two simple rules. I only attack people more powerful than me, and I attack people for what they think, not for what they are.
There's nothing I want to say today that is an attempt to mitigate or justify what happened last night. It was a wasteless, senseless act without redemption. Absolutely. But I do want to say, I could talk to you all day about the philosophical discussions about free speech, but I want to draw attention to something very specific about what Charlie Hebdo do, which is that they deploy the language, seemingly, of an admirable sort of French republicanism that doesn't just happen, but also coincides with the language of French nationalism. If those of you who've looked up it feels really improper. I acknowledge how improper it is to talk about this because, obviously, I feel as you do. You know, I'm Muslim, but I'm a human being too, who condemns what happens last night. But there is something about the way those images. There was one in particular I'm thinking about. It's the image of the Boko Haram, the girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram, and I'm sure lots of you have looked it up. It was published earlier this year. I think Sunny might know it too, where the girls are depicted as members of a sexual harem, the harem of Boko Haram, and they're pregnant and they're wearing hijabs, and they're belligerently proclaiming their right to benefits, right, to French benefits. I don't think The Guardian would have published that. I do think that's racist.
I wouldn't have drawn it.
But there is a difference. There's all the difference in the world between finding something offensive. Some mornings I get up, I find everything offensive. Between finding something offensive, condemning it in the most robust terms, using the most strident language you want, and then saying either then that's okay to kill people for it, or two, as Henry just slipped out, and no one...
She's not saying that.
No,
absolutely not,
I know you're not saying that,
of course.
but that is what the people who murdered those journalists in France were saying. Or, as Henry just slipped out, we must maintain the distinction between blasphemy and satire. And no one, I was watching the audience, no one even winced. We don't actually have a blasphemy law in Britain. It was abolished in 2008. Instead, we are having a blasphemy law that you have never voted for, that no parliament has passed, that has no right of appeal, no judge sitting over it, and the sentence for it is death. We're having a blasphemy law enforced at a barrel of a gun by the extremists of one religion. And don't think other religions won't notice the deference that's given to the extremists from other religions. That is the worst possible type of blasphemy law. That is one with no legal or democratic justification and has to be fought.
Is there a good type
before
of
we're
blasphemy
going to have a bit of debate. I just want to just say, in a minute, I want to really start to bring in people from the audience. So if people have got microphones prepared, could just be more prepared, and if people could show their hands if they want to chip in, now is a good time. And you catch my eye, please do that.
Can I throw in just a few comments just on Charlie Hebdo, because being French, I know about Charlie Hebdo, and I sort of know about its history and what it represents. And Charlie Hebdo can be extremely tasteless in some of the content that it will publish, extremely vulgar. They call themselves they call themselves bêtes et méchants in French, mean and nasty, yeah. and they claim that as a sort of way of exercising this ultimate provocation. They are no way representatives or carriers of what might be French nationalism or xenophobia or racism. I think it's really you may. I'm not a big fan of some of the drawings. Many publications, The Guardian, Le Monde, many mainstream media would not publish such stuff because it doesn't fit with their editorial identity. And what is at stake here is not do we like this stuff? Would we publish this on a regular basis, or even? But it's the fact that that people wanted they were physically destroyed, and Je suis Charlie is not about I condone every single thing Charlie printed. I mean, Charlie Hebdo over the years has aggravated so many people in France, and the Muslim and the Muhammad thing is fairly recent. They've existed since the early 70s. And they're very much part of that generation, that post-1968 generation that stood for shaking up some of the more traditionalistic aspects of France.
Is it the case that this horrific incident also feeds into a much wider anxiety in France about the relationship between Republican values, broadly understood, and Islam? There's a different relationship between the country and Islam in France than there is in this country, isn't there? Concerning Charlie Hebdo, they claim to be anti-all religion, and absolutely so. They think that the way that the French secularism will be defended is for them to be able to exist, producing that kind of provocative
stuff against the Pope, against any religion. That's one aspect. The other aspect is the place of Islam and specifically young Muslims, I would say, in France today, and how they relate to France's secularism, some of France's laws, the law banning scarves, headscarves, and other ostentatious religious symbols in state schools, and other things that are very much part of this ultra separation of anything to do with religion and anything to do with the state in France. And this goes back to our history. And it's quite radical in France that there's this stark separation of the state and religion, and that the republic is secular. These young French Muslims and this is shown in surveys, have a stronger relationship to religion as an identity factor than a lot of the French people of their generations who are not Muslim. And that's just one factor of the whole issue of integration and feeling that they belong to, and they're very much part of the fabric of French society. The other factors are unemployment, discrimination in the workforce, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Giles, can I respond to that? Just to say that I think there is something very specific and important to say about this notion of a kind of homegrown terrorism. And I was thinking about it when Hollande yesterday denounced the attack as barbaric, because this is the schoolgirl in me. That word barbaric is connected to barbarians, and it comes from the Greek barbaros, right, which means it means the stranger at the gate. The stranger at the gate who doesn't speak the language of the city. That's why they sound like they're saying barbar. That's what the word barbarian comes from, except that these people did speak French. And they weren't strangers at the gate. They were members of that state. They were citizens of that city, which makes this problem so much more complicated and difficult to uncouple for us, right?
That's what they did, which is barbaric.
Yes, of course.
Of course. That is, but
there's no undoing the fact that they are. The reason I say that is that it's such a commonplace for us to talk about how we are opposed to the language of us versus them. But the real challenge is to start to talk about us, and us that includes those people, as barbarically as they behave, but which includes those people.
Well, you're lumping in.
Very good point.
So isn't there? I think there's an issue here, though, which is that actually, why is it so difficult for liberals to convince Muslims that free speech is also for them? And that's the frustrating thing for me, because every time I make this point, and I've gone to Muslim audiences and I've said, free speech is for you, even if they insult your prophet. And there is a way of making that argument, which is about saying that actually free speech helps you, and actually it's beneficial for you. What frustrates me is that there's a whole bunch of people who only go on about free speech when Muslims are doing something, but not when Muslims are being, for example, carted away in prison, or they're being arrested for saying something on Facebook. And that's the one thing that frustrates me. And the second thing is that you have to say to them, look, free speech is for you because you need it more than the white liberals, because they're not the ones who are going to be spied on by GCHQ. So you should be standing up for free speech, more than anyone else in society, and you should just be standing up for freedom of, the right to insult religion, because that comes with it the right to practice religion, and that's important for you in this country. And we're not making that argument, and because we don't make that argument strongly enough by saying to them that this is also in your interests, that's why they're not convinced, because they think we're just saying it for ourselves. And they see the contradictions of the British government, they see the contradictions of how right-wingers behave, people like Douglas Murray, etc., Dan Hodges, and they think, why should we go for this?
We had I'm going to try.
Can I just say something about a specific thing about a cultural point, is that what nobody's mentioned, and I think you were starting to sort of describe a cartoon. The key thing about Charlie Hebdo, if we're all going to say we are Charlie, we should think about what it is, what Charlie Hebdo and what distinguishes it. And it's not unique among French magazines, but it is primarily visual. It's a primarily cartoon-driven magazine. You look at it, it's a bloody huge cartoon on the front. Now, you don't get that here.
We think of it like Private Eye, but it's not.
No,
really
it's nothing like Private Eye. Private Eye puts the cartoons very small on and it's
more like
very much sort of controlled by the writers, as it were. And I think our culture needs to understand about imagery. Imagery can be ambiguous. The cartoon you're describing was probably ambiguous. I'm not seeing it. I don't know which one you're describing. So I don't want to get into an argument about it because I don't have a clue. But ambiguity is and that's one of the things we do as, if you say, illustrating events, is we're playing with imagery. We are using it. We are juggling it. It's almost like dealing with explosives sometimes. And we know damn well it is. And we are deliberately striving for effect. That's true. And I think the T word got mentioned earlier, tropes. I hate that fucking word. Anyway, I won't mention it again. But I recently got, I had a rather dust up with the Reader's editor about using anti-Semitic tropes. And the Reader's editor very kindly agreed with some pro-Israeli ginger group that I had used an anti-Semitic trope, which I disagree with vehemently and still disagree with vehemently. But we toss these words around as if they mean something. But how do we look at pictures? Actually, we don't. We're not very sophisticated when it comes to pictures. And pictures are wonderful. The way they work is marvelous. The way an image worked in your eyeballs. That's the joy of doing what we do. Is actually you don't quite know what you've done. You see it back in print and you think, oh yeah, that works. Oh, that's good. God, I better draw a veil over that.
Before you come in, I'm
Yeah.
going to start to.
Well,
I'm
you
going
can't.
to start
It's
to. I'm
there.
going to
It's
start to
gone. It's out of the
broaden.
world.
I will start to broaden this out now. I want to try and
There's a plea for ambiguity, or for tolerance of ambiguity, if you like. Wonderful phrase.
I'm going to come out into the try and get a bit out into the audience. And we had a conference this morning, and it was a very lively debate that we had about this. Similar sort of points raised the ones that we've got here, and in part this is a window into the sort of Guardian's soul, I guess. And somebody who made a really good point, and I think they're here, is Iman Imrani, who's a freelance writer. Are you here, please? Because I want you to say what you say. At the back. We've got to have the microphone and stand up. And if you won't be able to recreate the passion, but it was like you made such a great point this morning.
Which point in particular?
Well, I'm giving you the platform now.
Okay, so my name's Iman Amrani. I work here. I'm a freelance journalist, and I'm half Algerian, half British. So I also identify myself publicly as Muslim, whatever that means. And yesterday I didn't want to say too much because when I first saw what had happened, my reaction, my first thought was, this is absolutely terrible. Imagine if this had happened here. You know, my reaction was, as a human, as a journalist, you know, it was not, oh gosh, is it one of us? That was not my first reaction. But slowly as the day went on, I started to get asked by people how Muslim I was, how devout I was. Somebody asked me if I prayed. You know, I felt very uncomfortable with that. And I really felt like yesterday was a day for mourning, as is today, and I completely agree with you. I almost feel uncomfortable having the discussions that we're having about censorship, about freedom of speech. But I think it's very necessary that we have those discussions and that both sides are heard. First of all, one thing that's very important to do is recognize that what happened yesterday happened in Paris, and the suspects are half Algerian. Okay, so they're Muslims, but they are not Muslims necessarily in the sense that some people, I've seen people talking about it as if they were the same as British Muslims. Well, British Muslims are predominantly, like, Pakistani community is quite a big Muslim community here, but Algerians in France, they have a completely different social background and political background, and the relationship between the French and the Algerians is very complex. It's not just about Islam, it's not just about religion. There's a whole history there. It's only 60 years since the beginning of the Algerian Revolution, and there's still a lot of pain there. And if you do not understand the relationship between the North Africans and the French, you really can't sit here and have a discussion about what happened yesterday and about Islam, because that is very fundamental. And, you know, we're talking about freedom of speech, we're talking about the media and everything. And in 1961, there was a massacre of Algerians in Paris. They went out to protest in the streets because there was a restriction on Muslims being out in the street after 8 p.m. So they went out in the streets to protest this because it was essentially, you know, a racist regulation on Muslims. They went out, the police came, and they were very violent. They killed well, some people say 200, and other people say, well, the official figure is 40. But it took 40 years for the French government to recognize that 40 Algerians had been killed by the police. The media did not report that. So, I mean, I know that's in the 60s, that's not now, but you have to recognize that's in people's heads. They don't trust the media. The media didn't serve them. It didn't report those people who were killed by the police. It didn't let that information be known. It took 40 years. And if you don't know that, I mean, I don't know, that's just some context for you.
Yeah, but
look,
in Pakistan, left-wing secular journalists and politicians are gunned down by the extreme religious right. Is that to do with the massacre in Paris in 1961? You're talking about... The problem with it is people slip effortlessly into whataboutery. What about 1961? What about France's colonial history? Lord knows what the Yazidis who are being raped and enslaved in Iraq and Syria have ever done to anyone. But, you know, you keep missing the point.
I don't think I'm missing the point. I'm giving it context.
And keep positing, as I was getting a bit worried with what Sunny was saying. A bloc, the Muslims, a monolithic, hermetically sealed bloc, as if there aren't all kinds of conflicts within it, as if in Britain there aren't, you know, all kinds of liberal and left-wing Muslims, and many of them are my friends and comrades, who are fighting the very reactionary forces that gunned down journalists in Paris yesterday, and will come out quite bravely, some of them, in public and say so. And unless people break away from any grievance you pick up. I mean, I'm as old as the hills, and even I wasn't born in 1961.
What I'm saying to you, though,
what you're saying is that they all have the same intention. What she's saying,
no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the exact opposite.
Because she's saying that they sometimes have different intentions. An Algerian Muslim is not in the same category as someone who's Pakistani, British. And what you're saying is basically these guys are all Islamists. They have the same intention.
No, I'm saying Islamists are all Islamists. And Muslims who aren't Islamists aren't. And you've got to bring some politics into this.
Yes, there are liberal Muslims. There's no doubt about it. And we all know them. We interact with them all the time. The point isn't that. The point is that you assume that the ones who are on the other side also have the same intention.
I make no such assumption.
Can I just have the microphone? Gentleman down here in a second. Shahidha.
I was going to say, I agree with you, Iman, and I also agree with you that context doesn't justify or mitigate violence. But yesterday, I had a documentary out on the World Service about a woman called Noor Inayat Khan. Some of you might know her. She was a French woman and a Muslim who's a World War II hero. She was awarded the Croix de Guerre for bravery, right? So context isn't everything, and context is different. There are different historical representations of Muslims, French Muslims, right? And we should emblematize someone like her, right, as a representative of French Muslimhood, right? That's
what I'm saying is there is a collective memory, and that is very much at the front of people's minds. I'm telling you that as a Muslim, people, and as an Algerian, people talk about this now. People mention this. But in this room, I don't know how many people would be aware of the kinds of feelings that the Algerian community has in France. And I'm saying to you, for example, I did raise in conference the fact that if we are going to talk about freedom of speech, there needs to be freedom of speech on all counts, on everything. You know, if you're not going to have limits and you're going to put freedom of speech out there, that needs to be the case with everything. I did say this morning, you wouldn't make a joke about the Holocaust, you wouldn't deny it, or would you? You know, if you're going to use a picture of the Prophet Muhammad and you're going to do it in a really offensive way, why would you not then let somebody with freedom of speech say something about the Holocaust? There are limits. And as well, people, if you were talking about modern day, that was 61, okay? Well, this summer, they banned people from protesting at what was happening in Palestine and Israel. France was the only country that was banning people from protesting in the streets. You know, if you're going to say freedom of speech, why were they not allowed to go out and peacefully protest against what was going on? Even in London, we had many protests.
I'm going to bring in the gentleman.
It's complete bollocks.
We can't hear you without the microphone, I'm afraid, so... Just without the microphone. And I'm going to go to the gentleman here.
These protests were not banned from anyone. They were just not organized or in any way.
No, they weren't. They were organised in exactly the same way as they are here.
The channels
can we move this discussion on? Because that's a little bit niche for us right now. And I'm going to move on to this gentleman here.
I was going to say, with all the talk of Muslims and Islamists and Pakistanis and British and whatever, and with the mention of the retaliatory attacks that have happened in France and perhaps ostracization of the Islamic community that might occur, is it time to stop saying Islamic extremists and start saying ideological extremists?
Henry.
Maybe. I mean, they're the same thing, aren't they?
Sorry, I missed that.
We should replace the word with Islamic by ideological extremism. So, I'm not really,
Sorry,
I'm not impressed. I'll tell you about a bit of context that I feel very strongly about. Is this country has, for many years, regardless who lives here, has fought for rights. And the context here, and why we're here, in the context of The Guardian, is that actually we believe in freedom and freedom of expression. So it's not just concern about minorities or majorities. It is about something we hold very, very dear and is important for all our happiness and our condition in this country as free people. So let's not, in all this, forget that it's about freedom of expression, however much we dislike what's being said. It is that's the context that I'd like to remind the lady who was just talking about.
Timothy Gartnash.
Timothy Gartnash. I write to The Guardian, but also have a project on free speech. And I think the key question is the one that was asked by Nick Cohen, which is, when all the dust has settled and we've had all our Je suis Charlie solidarity demonstrations, will the culture of fear actually be more pervasive? Will there be more self-censorship out of fear? Because if that is the case, and I fear it may be, then the assassins will have won. Even if they themselves are dead or locked up for life, the assassin's veto will have prevailed. And I think the only way to prevent that is solidarity. I think next week there should be a European media week of solidarity, and every major newspaper, broadcaster, and platform should republish a selection of the title covers from Charlie Hebdo, as Slate magazine has already done, carefully explaining why we're doing this. We wouldn't usually do it, but we're doing it to show that violent intimidation does not pay, that the assassin's veto will not prevail. I think without that solidarity, fear will have won and the assassin's veto will have won. I wonder if the panel could comment on that.
Well, I wonder if I actually might go slightly higher up and ask Alan Rusbridger, actually, who's sitting at the front here, if we can get a microphone. And I'm unfairly saying, in a sense, that question could be directed. I mean, Alan, how are we going to express our solidarity?
Well, we talked about this a lot this morning because there was a kind of sort of Twitter feeding frenzy last night of trying to, I think, provoke people to print more and more offensive material. And actually, we did print about 4 or 5, either digitally or in the paper, 4 or 5 of the images from Charlie Hebdo last night and this morning. And that wasn't enough for some people. Some people were tweeting me saying, yeah, but you haven't chosen the really offensive one. And then they wanted to choose a still more offensive one. And there are some very offensive ones that The Guardian would never in the normal run of events publish. And this was the replay of the debate over the Danish cartoons, that I didn't want to republish some of the Danish cartoons because The Guardian is The Guardian, and the Danish newspaper is the Danish newspaper, and Charlie Hebdo's. So we completely defend Charlie Hebdo's ethos and values and the right to offend in the way that they did. But it felt to me that there was a sort of tokenism in demanding that The Guardian should change, and I take Sonny's point here, that I think the thing that is important that we don't change as a result. If they want us to change and they want us to be more inflammatory and to contribute to the hardening of attitudes in society, I think one of the things The Guardian can do is not change and apply its normal editorial values as to what we should publish, and we will carry on publishing Steve and Martin. And that was the decision that we reached collectively as a paper this morning, having discussed it. But the one thing Natalie said this morning at the conference was the the feeling that this was an attack, that so many, and it was so deliberate to have chosen this time of day to go in and kill the people at the editorial meeting on their press day, that this was an attempt to put this paper out of business. And I think a more vital thing, Tim, is that we make sure that Charlie Hebdo comes out next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. And I think we ought to think of practical steps. And I know a lot of people here tonight and people who couldn't get in tonight said, what can we practically do? And Natalie's one suggestion from Natalie was that people should take out a subscription to Charlie Hebdo so that it has the funds. The Guardian Media Group has tonight given £100,000 to Charlie Hebdo to help sustain publication. I think Google has given $250,000. And I think there are things that one can practically do that would mean that this is not a publication that is going to be wiped out by this act.
Can I just make a small suggestion? It's in the light of what Alan said. What about suggesting an English language edition of Charlie Hebdo? Because it's a wonderful thing. And
I thought it was just pictures. You said it was just pictures.
No, it's got words in it that need translating. And there's a lot of extremely dense, what shall I say, colloquialisms, but French cultural references, which are way over my head, which would could stand being presented and translated just in a one-off, if you like. I mean, why not?
I know Nick Cohen's bursting together.
I'll just say this, and then I'll shut up for the rest of the meeting.
I doubt that.
I will. This is terribly important, going back to what Timothy and Alan were saying. If there isn't some pan-European act of solidarity reprinted, and for all kinds of reasons there may not be, a modest improvement on the rather desperate state we have been in for a very long time is that if you are censored, if, for instance, you have a cartoon from Steve or from Martin, and I'm not saying this is happening, but you say, no, we're not printing this out of fear. I'm worried that my office might be attacked, people, secretaries, journalists who haven't on the front line, I have a duty of care towards them will be hurt. We're not printing it. Then you say that. This applies to self-censorship across the board, incidentally. People are fed up of talking about Islam. It applies to journalists like me when, we're terrified of a libel writ. We know something's important, but we're not going there. If you're frightened, at least have the guts to say that. Because the most effective form of censorship is the censorship no one admits exists. And that has been going for a long time in Britain with religious violence. It's been going on ever since Rushdie. And I see the fear perfectly understandable in editors' eyes, and they say, well, look, Nick, we can't run a drawing like this. We just can't. How can I justify that to a family of someone who's killed, if someone is killed? But I say that's absolutely fine. But you have to say it, because otherwise, if you don't say it, you are conceding the ground to violent censors. You're saying to, and horribly exposing people who do stand out. There was a case a few months ago of Marjorie Nawaz, who is a liberal British Muslim. He tweeted an entirely inoffensive picture of a cartoon strip called Jesus and Mo, and the cartoon was Jesus saying hiya and Muhammad saying how you doing. His enemies, very rigorous reactionary enemies, whipped up a Twitter storm about it. He got death threats, and lots of journalists wanted to cover it. Channel 4 News would not show a picture of Jesus saying hi and Muhammad saying how you're doing, nor would the BBC. Off air, they would say, well, we've got correspondents in Pakistan. It's mad out there. You could get killed for that. They could get killed for that. But what they wouldn't do is admit in public that they were frightened. And
would you make a distinction between, would you make a distinction between, as it were, offensive images and just images per se of the Prophet Muhammad? So, I mean, some people have a problem with images per se of the Prophet Muhammad, but some people would have much more of a problem with the sorts of things that we as The Guardian wouldn't put on about anybody.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Are you discussing the former?
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is, if you're frightened, at least have the guts to say so. If you are banning material or stepping away out of fear, let people know that, and say when you do that, we're not doing it out of respect or sensitivity or any of these other words. We're doing this because we despise these people and we're afraid of them.
Don't speak on behalf of The Guardian, because don't impute motives to
I
us.
wasn't, no, sorry. Yeah.
Because it's maybe easier to speak about the Danish episode of 2006 because it's more distant. But the reason we didn't publish the cartoons there was not because we were frightened. We just didn't want to publish those cartoons. We felt there was a different context in which they were published, and The Guardian has its view of our role and what we'll publish. And so I think it would be misleading for you to say that this was a decision motivated by fear.
Can I respond to Timothy and actually say that I disagree with this view that things are getting worse? And it's a point that I wanted to make earlier. Most discussions I've had with Muslims over the last few years, and ever since the Danish cartoons controversy, actually show to me that they've become much more open to criticism, much more relaxed about stuff like this. And in those days, even during the Danish cartoons controversy, there were protests on the streets organized by the Muslim Council of Britain, etc. Since then, and there have been other controversies, they've barely done any protests. A lot of them say, you know what, it's a waste of time. We just get attacked more and we look foolish. So actually, I think that, put aside the extremists from ISIS, Al-Qaeda people, those people who are inspired by that. The vast majority of Muslims in the middle, I suspect, and most of the people have actually become more relaxed about criticism of their religion and more become pro-free speech more recently. So I wouldn't say, and I remember that even Inayat Banglawala a few years wrote a piece for The Guardian saying he was wrong to engage in the book burning of Salman Rushdie. Same thing with Majid Nawaz. There were people who were actively going for him, but it didn't catch fire anywhere outside of Twitter. Barely anyone other than within that sphere, within the sort of typical Muslim community groups, bothered to do anything about it. They were like, this is a stupid debate, and let these people argue amongst themselves. We're not that bothered. So I see what you're saying, but I do think there is a danger of pushing that card that all Muslims are like this and we must stand up, otherwise the terrorists have won.
There's a point of view, a question from the audience. I'm afraid I don't know your name.
Hi, my name is Naz. I'm a journalist myself, and I'm really interested in creating atmospheres where we can have constructive debate in society, and I think that's something we especially see on social media, whereby things become sort of a big mudslinging session quite quickly. But I think a point Sunny mentioned, or kind of hinted on, is that like a lot of the liberal press, I'd say, are very liberal in terms of sort of political ideas or like social ideas, but not necessarily in terms of like hearing other people's experiences or their viewpoints. And, you know, you're always seeing people being shut down as being traditionalist or this, that, and the other. So, I mean, while I think freedom of expression is really important, how much responsibility do we have as journalists to express ourselves in a way which also creates an atmosphere where other people can speak and where they feel that there is constructive debate happening?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's not about constructive debate, it's about attacking power. We're talking about freedom of speech here, so it's not all about Islam either. Here were 12 journalists and a policeman shot down. So I would like, in a way, to take Islam out of this altogether and just underline that journalists all over the world face very, very great challenges, often death threats and violence, in covering and doing their job. That's why I'm so pro Tim's idea, which I think is very good, Tim Garton-Ash's idea. I think we need to stop thinking about the social issues here and about religion. Is to say journalism is vital for our society and our democracies. I'm all for constructive debates and so, but sometimes these guys draw something that is absolutely necessary and fundamental and is offensive and nails power.
And also, we're not engaged in constructive debates. It's not what we do. You don't have just constructive debates by doing stupid cartoons of the Prime Minister with a big nose. That's not a constructive debate. That is straightforward mockery. That is an essential, if foul-mouthed, part of the political process. And we've been here for a long time doing this. That's what they were doing in Charlie Hebdo. They weren't engaged. I mean, what they were doing, they were provoking, they were taunting, they were behaving like schoolyard bullies. This is what we do. But it's a part of the freedom of expression. That's the point. I mean,
here's the problem, is the word bullies. And so we talked about power a little bit. This is about power. And it seems to me, if you go into the playground, I was only joking is the excuse of bullies the world over. So is there a sense in which you actually... You know, we say this is about power, but actually you're powerful people. And are there times when you feel that you've become a bully?
The only times I feel I become a bully is when people have been offended by my work and I haven't been targeting them. As I said, I only target people more powerful than me, of whom there are very few, to be honest. And one of them's sitting over there, by the way. But
have you targeted him?
I have drawn Alan several times, yes. I don't think you liked it, did you? No. But you know, I take all these points on. You know, the reason why I'm very proud to work for a paper like The Guardian is because I do control myself. As I said earlier on, you know, I don't attack people for what they are, I attack them for what they think. I don't attack people less powerful than me. There are many cartoonists around the world who do exactly the opposite of that. And I don't believe they're engaging in satire, because I don't think that's what satire is. I think it's about attacking you know, people for their ethnicity or their sexuality or because they're poor. But you know, there are cartoonists, my colleagues working in right-wing newspapers, who do exactly that all the time.
Shahidha. I was going to respond to Timothy's question because the thing I would want to say is that circulating those images, a variety of those images, the offensive, the ones that I think are racist, and the ones that aren't, I don't think that is the only way of expressing solidarity or necessarily the most effective. And in answer to your proposition also, I would say that one of the ways in which we create that space to talk about difficult things is to talk about democracy, about what democracy is. And freedom of speech is just one part of democracy. For me, another part of democracy is an ability to defend all members of a society, all citizens, protecting and defending and caring for a minority as well as a majority, and cultivating an inclusive sense of nationhood. And for me, democracy is most literally about voting, right? It's about creating a nation where people care enough about a nation to vote. And so that's what I think we should do, right? Because they're us, not them.
I think it's fundamental to, you know, as we exchange views and this is all about pluralism and exchanging views, you know, and freedom of speech is about pluralism, and of course the conversation has to be wide and large and all sorts of voices. But I think, do we all agree that in no way can we at any moment, any second, lead anyone to believe that Charlie Hebdo had it coming, you know. We have to be very, very careful with that. You know, whatever we think, basically, about the context, about it is inadmissible to even hint at the fact that they had it coming. They just went overboard. They pushed the limits too far. They had it coming. That is a very dangerous thing to think, and that's why the solidarity is so important. It is to show that whatever they produced, whatever they published, it is impossible to let them be you know, crushed and silenced. That's why the identification thing is important, I think.
No, I agree.
Yeah. There's a gentleman here that had his hand up. Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to make a point about how, for me as a reader, what I saw yesterday was the first thing that I thought about was Anders Breivik in Norway, and I think the panel's been talking about it, about the attack on freedom of speech. There's something that feels very different this time about what's just happened, and a question I'd like to pose. It's probably a little bit left field. But what would happen if tomorrow we were to find out that, say, the 9/11 bombers were Manchurian-type candidates and hadn't been responsible for what they did? How would that change the debate? Yeah.
And there was someone behind as well who had that's the gentleman with that hand up over there. I'm going to have a few questions, points on the floor now.
I'm going to be very, very quick. It's for my English friends that I'm French, that don't know Charlie newspaper maybe as much as we do, French people. Is that, and I react to the comment of this young lady over there. There is this thing about you can be offended by the front page of Charlie Hebdo. But of course, after the front page come a whole new newspaper, a whole magazine. And inside you have other picture and other text and other element that the journalist would say, you know, it's all for fun, it's all we don't really believe in that. We're doing that because we want to make you react, we want to make you think. And what I mean by that is that there is a trap of images, and Charlie Hebdo was not about provocative images. It was about different images coming together, and it was also about text. So it's...
But they were provocative images. I mean, a number of them were very
Oh, they were very provocative. But you can imagine that one provocative image would call for another provocative images, and you would have a dialogue between them. And it's not just, it wasn't just about, it is not just about one single images.
There was someone at the, microphone at the back, yes.
Stand up. My name's Lucy, I'm a lawyer, and I apologise, this is a really boring legal point, but I think it's important to remember when we talk about, we're talking about cartoonists being bullying and these being provocative images, that, I mean, freedom of expression, while very important, is not an unqualified right, either in France or in this country or across Europe. We have laws which, whether you agree with them or not, seek to strike a balance in our countries. They're criminal laws, civil laws, varies across Europe. But it seeks to strike a balance which reflects our culture as to where freedom of expression is allowed and where it ends. And we have criminal laws that prevent expression which incites race hatred and violence, and we have libel laws which shift, and this year they've shifted quite a lot in favour of the press, whereas before they were much more restrictive. And these are the laws that reflect our culture. So when we're talking about the expression that we do allow in our countries, let's remember that all the time they are subject to these laws. And if these cartoons were defamatory or offensive or racist, then there are routes which don't involve guns, which enable people to complain about it. So let's not criticise the expression that we allow. We have a network of laws in our countries that seek to strike the right balance. So we mustn't hold freedom of expression up and mislead people that it's somehow this, unqualified right that is threatening and allows abuse and bullying of that kind. If it goes over the mark, then one would hope that our country, over its hundreds of years of debate about this subject, is trying to strike a balance. Not always in a place where I or The Guardian would agree with each other, but there is a balance there and there's an ongoing debate, and that's how we deal with things.
Thank you very much indeed. So there's a gentleman down here at the front, and just a few comments before we return back to the panel.
It's really no more than a little anecdote, but it's not irrelevant. 12 years ago, I made a film for the BBC about political cartoonists in Israel, political cartoonists in Palestine. And coming out of Gaza with a book of extremely violent cartoons, I got stopped at a checkpoint, and surprise, surprise, the book was found. And the authorities leapt on it with great censorship and anger. But a lot of young Israeli soldiers, who were all about 18, 19, 20, with guns, were absolutely riveted. And their comments were, how could they say such nasty things about us? We don't read Arabic newspapers. We've never seen cartoons that are so unfair. I mean, are we really like this? And it led to an hour-long dialogue. The book, of course, was taken away, but the kids adored it because it gave them a new insight into how one culture sees another.
I think you wanted to say something there, and then one person at the back there, and I think right at the back over there, and I'm going to return things to the panel.
What I wanted to say is that there was a ruling in the French legal system when actually the French Muslim Council sued or tried to sue Charlie Hebdo, and actually that was dismissed. The case of blasphemy was dismissed. And I think that would be the ground why in our European society Charlie Hebdo cartoons can be reproduced alongside this ruling, because the line was drawn.
Yes, indeed. There was a trial. Charlie Hebdo has been put on trial in France, and this happened in 2007, I believe. And the judge ruled that nothing in the content of Charlie Hebdo violated any of the laws that are the architecture of French democracy. So
it was banned. Wasn't there a sort of predecessor to Charlie Hebdo that said some very nasty things about de Gaulle and was banned for a little while by the French state?
Now this would go all the way back to, I think, 1970. And laws were different in France, and I think indeed they ran into trouble.
It was the same editorial, some of the same editorial people that went into Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah, indeed. And this points to what I was saying earlier about how Charlie Hebdo contributed, to making France a more open-minded and pluralistic society in terms of public expression, and that's why the symbol of Charlie Hebdo being targeted by gunmen is so strong.
Someone at the back.
My name is Dominic Stevens. I'm a card-carrying atheist and a torn-up Catholic card in the background, and I've been a doctor, all of which is relevant. I wanted to try and think the one point about the image of the prophet, which is so inflammatory. And I would like us, none of us can, or hardly any of us, can possibly feel what this means. Maybe if we think about another episode which happened in the States years and years ago, when there was violence against people who were going about their normal business outside abortion clinics, maybe the intensity of the feeling which we can understand about abortion is also connected to the images of the prophet.
We've got about 5 minutes or so left before we're going to wrap up. Oh, Sonny, you've got a
I have a
sort of like
point regarding the law in France. So in around about 2006, 2007, I was involved in a bunch of debates with Muslim organizations who wanted a law in this country around religious hatred, because Muslim organizations primarily felt that they were being marginalized too much, Muslims were being demonized, they wanted religious... Again, I said, no, this is not going to help you, because free speech laws are always used against minorities. When you clamp down on free speech, it's always used against minorities first. Guess what happened? As soon as they passed a law, it was used against Muslim preachers who were obviously saying stupid things in mosques. But the point is that they were preaching hatred, and it was used against them. And I said, this is exactly what was predicted, which was going to happen. So this is one of the reasons why I say that I think it's possible to convince minorities that free speech can work on their behalf, but they think the law is going to protect them, and actually it is always used against them. And this kind of relates briefly to the point that Naz was making too, which is about debate. I don't always think this is about debate. I mean, Henry's quite right saying that actually a lot of the times we have to express a point, and sometimes you just have a clash of arguments. One person saying you should respect my religion, another person saying, no, well, I should be allowed to criticize it. But I think there is a point which, reiterate from before, we can convince minorities, Muslims especially, that free speech is good for them and freedom of religion is good for them. I just don't think we do a very good job of it.
I want to leave the last word on this subject this evening to cartoonists who are up there. It seems to be entirely appropriate. Steve, when you did your cartoon today, which I thought was brilliant, which is the murderers dressed up as sort of both in sort of death suits and Mickey Mouse suits, and saying, "Why are the fuckers still laughing at us?" Talk us through that when you're just like, when you're starting off with a you hear what's going on, you know you have to do the cartoon. Yeah. What's going through your head when all this is coming together?
You're getting every other radio broadcast organisation on earth ring you up at the same time, so it does make it very difficult. But no, it's the thoughts go through your head. Christ, it was horror. It was just personal sense of shock, because oh my God, they've done it. They've killed cartoonists, and four of the best as well, because. These weren't just, run-of-the-mill cartoons. I mean, the thing about the Danish cartoons, the context and everything was totally different, but actually the cartoons themselves weren't terribly good, and they certainly weren't very funny. The thing about Charlie Hebdo is it is funny. It's a very vigorous, vital magazine, and Wolinski, Kabul, and Schaub and Tinius. And I met Tinius. He's a lovely man. His work really stuck in my mind. This was years ago, but he's got a fabulous, loose, liquid, sensual line. The thing of difference between British cartoons and English cartoons, there is a very distinct difference, is that French cartoons are much ruder, but in a very different way, a more sensual way, a more sexual way. and they just don't give a shit. They don't give a fuck. And that was what I loved about Tinus's stuff, all this stuff. It has this edge to it. And they freely admit it. We are an irresponsible magazine, I think that was one of their strap heads. This is what we should cherish, and these people are heroes, for me anyway. And but there was the others who died too. So there was that sense of terrible, almost a sense of personal loss, but then a sense, oh Christ, what am I going to say? And then trying to think, well, what they want, what the cartoon I suppose was saying was that it's trying to impose terror, it's trying to frighten. Deliberately, that's dressing in black, the sinister, well, in this case, not beheadings, but the same thing, just shooting down in cold blood, coolly, calmly, in broad daylight. It's designed to try and laugh at it. Now, of course, it was no time for laughter. There's no laughs in it. It's not really a funny cartoon at all. So I gave them comic attributes, i.e. the Halloween skeleton suit and the big feet and Mickey Mouse ears, which is probably a gratuitous insult to Mickey Mouse, but we'll pass over that. And bunged it off and hope it worked, as usual. For some people it didn't. I was reading the lines underneath. But that's the job. That's what we have to do. And so this sense of this is, I feel a sort of profound sorrow. I've done another one for tomorrow because, of course, that was yesterday. I had to do that. And hopefully it works. I don't know. I'll see it tomorrow. You think, oh God, it tastes this crap. Might make you wince, but then that's partly the name of the game. So we have to defend these visual media, which we don't really understand the way they function. And the French cartoons function very differently. And there's lots that they do that I would never dare or even dream of trying to pass by Alan, because I know I know Alan would faint. And yet there's stuff I can do which I know would not get across in France. There's a certain kind of viciousness and personal attacking that we can do here, which goes back a long way. It goes back 200 years. It goes back to the days of William Hone, Cruikshank, Gilray. This vicious school of Cohen. It really is personal abuse. And we've got a long, long tradition of that. And that we do things that the French wouldn't dream. The French are far more polite in their political discourse, I think.
Martin, final word, the moral purpose of laughter.
It makes us feel better. I mean, as I said at the beginning, the reason why we have this capacity for laughter is because it's a human evolutionary survival tool to help us cope with the horrors of navigating our ways through life. And laughing at other people is actually one of the things we laugh at, because other people are terrible, we know that. And they're frightening as well. Like shit, like sex, like death. We also laugh at...
saying sex is frightening. I want to talk to you about that
time. It is.
Giles, perhaps there's another time to go down that route.
It is for many people, mostly because of the teachings of your church.
Oh, okay. Do you know, I thought I was going to get away with it, but obviously not. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Give everybody a round of applause. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks a lot.